that I'm trying to get this through and think about maybe I should just play the audio straight up, or if I should go into the position of introducing what ends up happening in a particular event like what took place with United. Okay, so there's some notes here.
I just introduced.
We'll go through the parts that we know of, okay? Because it's, first of all, it bears noting, okay, that when you have an engine failure of any sort in a major airliner, there's a trained crew up front on this aircraft that knows exactly what they want to do. Okay, they know what the successful outcomes are going to be. They know what they're trained to do, and they spend hours upon hours upon hours, and I do stress this many, many times, doing engine out operations to safely make sure that when an engine fails, that they are properly trained and prepared. And to go back into what Corey we were talking about this, and he's just made some notes. So I'm just going to read from this.
Oh, yeah.
On the 20th of February, 2021, United Boeing 777-200 registration, November 772 UA. Okay, actually it would be
Uniform Alpha. But...
Uniform Alpha, right? Performing a flight was Uniform Alpha 328 from Denver, Colorado. I used to be based for United Express in Denver to Honolulu. So with 231 passengers on board, 10 crew. There is their initial climb out of runway Denver on 25. Now 25 runway out of Denver is going directly towards the mountains, almost due west.
Yep.
And what they had is basically they had a Pratt & Whitney 4077 engine that had a complete and total engine failure, which ended up having the entire engine nacelle separate from the aircraft. Now, this happened at 13,000 feet. Denver, as we all know, about 5,636 feet, as the runways are actually at that altitude, which is why they call it the Mile City. So the crew requested a return to Denver. Denver was happy to oblige, and they offered them multiple runways, and they ended up coming back in on runway 26. But now the difference is they came back in 23 minutes later. Now, at 13,000 feet, obviously, if you do the math, at about a 1,500 foot per minute rate of climb to about 2,000 foot per minute rate of climb, these guys were roughly, at the time when this accident happened, they were roughly 4.5 minutes out on their climb out. Okay? So why would it be another 20 minutes before they come and land? And this is one of the things we're going to talk about really quick, okay? They were advised also before they made the return back to the field that there was going to be some sort of level of asking for crash, fire, and safety, and that there would be people standing by. There was no injuries.
Just standard procedure.
Standard procedure, right? And the unfortunate part is, though, that they littered the ground with the engine nacelle and shroud from the 777. Okay, now the good thing is the 777 fleet has been grounded for inspection, especially the ones that have the Pratt & Whitney 4077 engines, which is great, and there's only 2 operators, I believe, one in Singapore, and United is the other one that has the 777s that actually have those engines. So this is the first thing that they're actually talking about.
Oh, really, James? That's quite interesting.
What's that?
James in chat says the pieces landed only a mile or 2 from his...
Oh, that's, I've actually got friends of mine that other pilots used to fly with that are actually got pictures on Facebook of it literally being in the field across the street from their apartments, and there's pieces of that, so on and so forth. So there's a couple of things that we could go through here, and so one of the first things I kind of want to bring up, okay, is this is from another group here, which is called VAS Aviation, and this is part of their conversation of what took place and how this actually went down. Okay, and we're just going to play a little bit of this because it's interesting to hear the conversations of the actual crew, and you can see a visual representation.
Departure, United 328 Heavy, Mahalo. Number departure, United 328 Heavy is with you out of 6 for flight level 230.
United 328 Heavy, Devon departure, radar contact, climb and
as we're doing this out, I'll just talk for just 2 seconds and say, so this is off live ATC, and that's a website you can listen to recorded messages from tower and aircraft. It's required by regulation to be stored for so long after it's flown for things like this.
Yep.
So this is an animation that the guys at VAS Aviation webpage really do some good.
Yeah, we have the link below in the description.
Yeah, check that out. But this is actual, like, this is not a remake, is what I was kind of getting at. This is actually the actual conversation between ATC, the air traffic controllers, departure control, but also the people in the tower, and then the pilots in the plane.
Yep. So generally, when you're coming off runway 25, they start their way into departure.
United 328 Heavy, clear direct Zimmer.
All right, direct to Zimmer, United 328 Heavy.
All right, so what you're going to notice there is that what happens is the pilot, you can hear his voice kind of fluctuate, and he goes, "Oh, Zimmer." And the reason why is because on this particular departure, which is what we call a standard instrument departure, or SID, Zimmer is a fix on this, and when you get that, it's the last fix on this one, so they're getting basically direct routing to miss all these other traffic routing points. So he's like, oh, Zimmer. There's almost like a hint of excitement, and it seems like climb out's just going as expected.
Denver departure unit did 328 heavy, we experienced an engine failure, need a turn.
All right, so here we go. So when we're basically diagnosing something like this, right? You can actually hear on the call that they're actually making to ATCs, you can hear the fire alarm going off behind the background.
Yeah, the fire bells, yeah.
The fire bells are going off, which means there's an immediate response that's going on by the crew, okay? And as they're going through their diagnosis, he immediately knows that there's an engine failure because on the CAS system, the screen that's usually in between the two pilots, there's an annunciator panel, and that panel usually illuminates little bars that say, hey, engine fire, engine flame, engine this. They can glance down, and they have to start going through a troubleshooting procedure. And that's exactly where the pilots were in this particular event. And
so if you haven't seen it, it's at timestamp 210 in this video. I don't know if we'll get there anyway, but there is images of a passenger sitting in one of the windows by the...
Mayday, United 28, United 328 heavy, Mayday aircraft.
And a very competent Mayday call. They're calm, they're cool.
Yeah, United Denver departure, United 328 heavy, Mayday aircraft just experienced engine failure, need a turn immediately.
328 left or right turn?
Left turn.
328 turn left heading 080.
Left heading 080, United 328 heavy.
All right, so in this particular case, whether they're looking at obstructions or so on and so forth, and maybe they judged how much of the engine was actually lost, it's not producing any thrust, they ask him for what direction of a turn because they want to make it easier for them. At this particular point, the minute that that Mayday call went out, ATC is clearing space both left and right of these targets. They don't give a crap at this point. As soon as that Mayday went out, these guys were given carte blanche to go wherever they basically needed, especially in an engine out scenario. So that's one of the things that you'll hear them talk about from this point forward, because all exceptions will be made to land this aircraft. Now, what comes next is very, very interesting, and you might be shocked, but people shouldn't be when they hear what's about to happen next.
Pilot discretion, maintain 9,000.
Okay, descend and maintain 9,000, United 328 heavy.
United 328, do you want to straight into runway 7?
At immediate, we need to let's go. We need to run some checklists.
All right, so that's where we're going to stop that for a minute, okay? And this is where the conversation comes in as pilots.
Yep.
Right? You might be shocked as to hear that they were given a runway 7, and these guys didn't jump all over that opportunity, because there's a reason. And the reason is because in order to successfully handle an engine out situation, we have a comparative event here where the aircraft is obviously not doing what's expected. When you're in the simulators, and I can tell you this, it's intense. You go through many, many training situations like this to go through very clear and concise conversation between you and another pilot on board. You're both trained to the same standard, because I don't know if that pilot's flown with this guy 6 times or if this guy's flown for the first time on this trip, but they both knew exactly what was going to happen. And the minute that that engine went out, the very first thing they did was secure the very immediate checklist items that they could. But there's a thing called a QRH, which is called a Quick Reference Handbook, that sits usually in the center console between the two pilots, that actually whoever's the flying pilot, he simply monitors the gauges and actively aviates. Okay? Navigation and communication happens as a joint effort between both the first officer and the captain. And whoever's the pilot monitoring will grab the QRH and seemingly start to go through what would... I guess at that point you would think that they're almost so calm it sounds rehearsed, but it's so rehearsed at this point that they literally don't want to land immediately, because they can take actions that can mitigate and make this landing so much easier for themselves. And Corey can elaborate on some of that.
Yeah, sure. So first off, I'm with an emergency in an aircraft. If you guys are not pilots, or if you are pilots, one thing you'll hear your instructor probably say many times and read about is something called aviate, navigate, communicate. And those are steps that you want to take or must take in order to handle in flight, not just in emergencies, but anything you really do in flight. And so we can apply it to this case as well. So aviate, navigate, communicate. So first thing that you may not know is when they were dealing with the initial instrument indications they probably did a few things first, and then just took a quick bearing where they were and then made the call, probably. I mean, it doesn't take long. I'm not saying that minutes. It probably was pretty quick. But still, there was somebody who, again, Mike said pilot flying. Whoever the pilot was flying, they continued flying the aircraft. The other guy, they probably saw some indications. They probably said, you know, I see this. They confirmed that's what we see together, and then they probably said them.
So they call those memory items.
I was just literally the exact thing I was going to say next was there's some things that pilots were trained to do
immediately
because of the necessity of time that you have available to do, and some of them are called memory items. So when you would take out a checklist, everything you would need to do for any emergency is going to be encompassed in the checklist. But you'll see a lot of times, depends how it's written, but there's going to be a section or some things that are just called memory items.
Mm-hmm.
Those are things you do not have time to pull the checklist out and look at and then do. You literally say, okay, no, Captain, fire on engine 2 or whatever, and you confirm however you confirm, and then you just do the memory item. And no matter where the checklist is, you just do those things.
And basically, when there's an engine fired, the number one thing would be number 1 thrust lever identified.
Probably auto thrust down, throttle lever down, fuel cut off.
Actually,
if
don't
fire
even
indications. Then they probably turn the little knob to extinguish fire. Right. Number 2. I mean, but those are checklists done.
So this is how it basically goes. So if I was pilot flying, I would turn around and I would say number 1 thrust lever identified, and the first officer would say, okay, he'd literally put his finger over and say number 1 thrust lever identified.
Okay,
number 1 thrust lever idle, and you would literally both watch as it went to idle, and you would confirm. So you did not shut off the operational engine because that has happened, which has happened. Okay. Then someone would the pilot that was non-flying would see number 1 thrust, number 1 or number 2 in this case, number 2 engine lever or fire extinguishing lever handle pull. Okay, and then they would go up. Number 2 handle identified. The next pilot would look at it, go verified, pull. Then the conversation at this point would be, do you rotate? Okay, because if there's any significant damage, separation, or fire, then it's a rotation, because when you rotate that handle, it fires fire extinguishing bottles into and around the engine nacelle. And what basically does is that starts the fire extinguishing process. Then there's 2 bottles. You can shoot the A bottle or the B bottle. Okay, and that's the rotate left or right on the handle. So right then and there, that's what these guys did within the first minute and a half. And the reason why they're saying at this point they have to run checklists is because they have to what they call secure the engine, which means they just got to make sure that they're going to be able to land with 1 engine, going to put the aircraft in a trimmable configuration, run obviously what's going to be their numbers at this point, because like Corey can iterate here.
Yeah, so I brought up as well, I mean, other things they have to do that may not be apparent to just passengers is if you're on board that aircraft and you just took off from Denver and you're going to Hawaii, you've got a lot of fuel on board.
Oh, yeah.
And for aircraft, again, something else you may not know, there are maximum weight limits. There are weight limits. Their weight limits for pushing, how much fuel you can actually put in the aircraft, taxi limits, takeoff limits for fuel. You can actually taxi in an aircraft heavier than you're allowed to take off because you're going to use some fuel on the way to the runway. There's all these limits, which is for safety. They're tested limits.
Max takeoff.
There's also landing limits for weight limits. Weight on wheels and things. So part of what Michael goes as well is after they secure the engine, so they've aviated and navigated. Now they've communicated what they need. Now they're actually navigating back towards the runway. Now you'll see, I think we haven't got there in the video yet, but they're going to ask for more time to run checklists. Actually, they're going to ask for time for more checklists. And even the ATC guy calls them a few times, actually, and keeps offering them runways. And you'll see, I think 2 or 3 times they just say, we'll keep coming back around.
Yeah. But
and they need a bit more time because they're literally, they got to run a few more checklists and then make sure the aircraft is in a configuration they can safely landed now. And then it's controllable as well. And then, of course, too long, but it's still something they have to go through with it.
Yeah, so there's
Michael get there. So
there's more work to be done. So the checklists are, they've successfully completed their checklists. They have done their memory items. They have done their items that are now related to the QRH, and now they're going to go into basically cleaning up and making sure they can actually achieve this approach. So we're going to listen a little bit more here for a second. Here's the video.
There's the video. So that's literally what number 2, which is the engine on the right. Only 2 engines on this aircraft. That's the engine over the right wing, and you can see it's less than new. It's well, it might be new. It's in pieces. There's a cowling that goes around it. That's gone.
Fuel and souls on board and intentions.
Yep. So now they're giving them the final information on souls.
Since they declared an emergency, ATC asks how much fuel you have on board, and then how many people, souls are on board.
airport right now, or do you want delay vectors for anything else you might need?
We'll need delay vectors. We need to still run a few checklists and get some landing data.
There you go. Okay, so that's the next part. So they want to run checklist and do some landing data. So they're asking for delay vectors. What that basically means is that ATC now is going to give them a left and a right turn at some point to give them some time. And when he talks about now, we got to run some more checklists and we've got to get some landing data. So here's what happens, like Corey alluded to, these landing weights. Well, guess what? No one's sitting there with a calculator in their hand going, oh, let me do landing weights here. Let me do landing weights there. No. There's what's called in the middle of the aircraft. There's two interfaces called the flight management system. Okay, and these things are just basically boxes that you could go in and touch and make any adjustable data entries to the actual aircraft. So basically giving the aircraft information on what it actually sees and does. Yep. And in doing such, when you look at an FMS, this FMS is quite elaborate. Okay, and it ties into also your approach, and it ties into your navigation, and it also will tell you the distance that you need to successfully land an aircraft. Okay, so, and what that aircraft FMS will do is it'll also give them localizer information. So it'll basically help them maneuver the aircraft onto the final approach. All right, so what I'm going to just bring up here for a second is just something else I want to show you because... Yeah, so in the issues of if you're looking at a flight deck and what this basically means in the annals of an FMS, okay, well that's great. This is basically what it comes down to, right? So an FMS is this little box right over here. All right, so this box right here, that's an FMS and that's an FMS. Okay, so when they're going through their diagnosis, he's going to go ahead and he's going to compute how much weight they have in fuel on board. He's going to turn around and enter that in. He's going to see the available runways that ATC was able to give them, and then he's going to turn around and make an assessment and say, we can use this runway because we're coming in overweight. Okay, we have to worry about our braking distance, we have to worry about the runway condition, and we have to look at the wind. That's going to set their approach speed. Now, their approach speed for single engine out operations could be different than dual engine operations, and they also have to consider that this little wheel back here, which is the trim wheel, okay, is going to be configured for one engine not producing thrust. So they're literally going to go through that process. And Corey can elaborate a little bit more about what's going to go on in their thought process at that level.
Yeah, sure. So after now they've already talked to ATC and they've said we're getting vectors. But as Mike said, whoever is most of the time they're plugging all that data in. As Mike alluded to, the FMS brings all the data from the outside, from air temperature to the runway conditions, lengths, and all that stuff, pressure, altitude, all those things. And it gives you some solutions on, what runway you're going to land on, how long it's going to take for you to brake with one engine out, with whatever speed you approach the runway at, whether the runway is dry, wet, all that stuff. And then they're probably, at some point, I think they're probably communicating to the cabin crew. I don't know when that occurred, but that was certainly after they communicated to ATC. They've secured the engine. They have the aircraft under control now. It's not out of control. And they have a plan. Then... something probably to back again, like I said.
When they talk to the cabin crew, I can tell you,
not like right away, but at some point.
Well, they'll tell the cabin crew what they'll do is you'll buzz the head flight attendant, and when you buzz her in, you'll say, or him or her, you say, hey, by the way,
number two's out.
Yeah, number two's out. But you don't say anything to panic them. What you basically deliver them is, hey, we're gonna turn back. Okay, so we're no longer continuing, so they know that. They give you an amount of time. We're going to be on the ground in roughly 12 minutes because this way they have the opportunity to secure the entire cabin for a different type of approach and landing.
They're doing back there.
They're going to tell them what's expected when they get on the runway, which means when we touch down, there will be crash, fire, and safety rolling so that no one is startled when they look out the window and they see fire engines paralleling the taxiways along. And he's also going to tell them if they plan an emergency evacuation or not and where they intend to do it. So they're going to say, hey, by the way, we're going to do a full stop landing on the runway, and we're actually going to evacuate the entire plane there, or we're going to attempt to put the fire out and get back to the gate. All right, so that's the conversation that they're going to have right there.
Communicating that.
Yep. All right.
And then one thing while we're just continuing just wanted to bring up the human factor in here, right? So in the beginning when stuff happened, a little bit of nervousness in the voice because, startled. It's out of the ordinary. Things are not going as they would normally in normal flight. But you'll see as we get a bit further in and we start circling back to the runway, listen to the way the pilot sounded.
328.
This guy. He's fine. It's normal. Flight is normal.
What runway you're planning for? 328 heavy.
Yeah, 328, you can have any runway you like, so just let me know.
Any runway you like. Free runways.
If you want to go into the west runways, or I can take you up to the north and take you to the south runways, it's really your call.
Now there's
runway 5 to runway 26.
And right now,
information Quebec is current, about 32966.
All right, one last piece of information. So right there, they just offered them, because these pilots probably did not have an opportunity to listen to the ATIS to get the proper information to come back into the airport, and it's been an elapsed time of 23 minutes. The winds and conditions may have changed, so they give them that for free. But like Corey said, now look, yes, they're very calm, but I guarantee you one of those pilots is going through an actual moment where he's going, oh shit, this actually really happened. We actually really had the engine failure.
Of course.
Look, their sim training is fantastic. That's why this is almost a non-event. And let me tell you something. This is literally in the annals of any pilots in their abilities to handle this situation. They have been trained so heavily at this. This is pretty much a non-event. And that's why you hear it first. There was a little bit of fluster, just like Corey said. But just to reiterate, this is almost a non-event. And we'll just play this out to conclusion now.
639, 328.
328, we can take a tighter turn in here.
That's 328 heavy, about 8 miles from draft, turn left heading 290, making at about 7,000, go establish on the localizer, clear ILS approach, how much you could.
I cleared your ILS 26, United 328 heavy.
Runway 26.
United 328 heavy, Denver Tower, wind 3609er, runway 26, clear to land, Denver altimeter 2966.
Third on 26, United 328 heavy.
And this
United
is
328 heavy, equipment is standing by your
standard operating
frequency. When you land
procedure.
and roll out,
He's giving him a
talk
discrete
to
frequency.
the personnel on the ground is 120.15.
All right, 2015 for United 328.
United 320 heavy, plan a full stop on the runway, and then the personnel will come in and check out your aircraft, and then we'll get you moving from there.
Okay, full stop on the runway, United 328 heavy.
All right, there you
Comes
go.
in, lands.
And that's it. So here's the things. Basically, first of all, another shout out to the VAS Aviation guys on your website and the YouTube video that you guys produced, because that enabled us to make a great stride in giving you some of the insights into what's going on in the pilot's mind when there's actually an engine failure on board an aircraft with commercial paying passengers.
So yeah, shout out to them real quick from me too, because they're obviously super quick. I mean, this happened on the 20th, and this video happened on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some work going on. Somebody over there. So thanks for that, because it makes us a lot easier to talk through this. So
to talk through it.
Thanks so much.
And so as a result of that, also just remember the United 777s are grounded, and they're preparing for an airworthiness directive from the FAA, which is going to stand in and basically say, hey, look, we found something with these hollow blades that are
what
basically.
did they find? We haven't told anybody what they found.
We don't know what happened yet, but we're probably going to hear more about this in the not too distant future, because unfortunately, as any event goes, there's great information that comes from the post-diagnosis of what happened, and we'll wait to find out exactly how this all went about. But again, to the crew and to United and to everyone that was involved, you guys did a great job. Yeah. Can't say much more than that.
Just that before we close that out too, just what we know so far, what happened. It appears that the fan blades. So if you look at the front of a jet engine on a passenger plane as a big bypass turbine, and you see those they're like fan blades, like your fan on your ceiling, but there's a whole lot more of them, a lot more closer together. It appears as though, what was it? It was two, right, Mike?
I think it was actually. Wait, I'll show you here. Hold on.
Two pieces. I think it says in there, detached.
Right.
And this thing is spinning
right
quickly,
here.
as you know, when you've been on a passenger plane, you look outside, you can see it spinning quite quickly. They actually designed these so that the cowling around them can contain a blade failure.
Yes.
But not always. Right, and so what it appears is that certainly you can see a piece of one missing.
Oh, there's two. No, there is two.
But that's what I was going to say.
Now I see.
It appears there's two of them that had this issue. One of them was contained, the other was.
Yeah.
And thus you have the engine coming apart mid-flight, and that's why it obviously destroyed itself. Flying everywhere. But you can imagine one of the things that it's trying to do when they have an uncontained engine like this with turbine with the blades, to keep the blades from flying off and hitting the cabin. Right?
Yes.
It's one of the huge engine goes boom and goes bye-bye. Okay, not good. But let's keep the cabin integrity intact.
Right.
And that was the case. As far as we're aware, nothing happened in the cabin, so
which is good.
Which is good. Yeah.
Fantastic. And
so,
and the opportunity there is that, look, you know, everybody wants to second guess. Everybody wants to be part of the equation in certain things like this. And if you're part of an actual flight crew, this is what you prepare for. This is what people do. It's almost considered a non-event. If I had $1 for every engine out that I did in a flight simulator, I'd be a wealthy man, because you do a lot of them. And congratulations to the crew. I'm sure we'll be hearing more, hopefully from on their names, because they did such a great job. And again, you know, outside of this being just a normal everyday operation, just like Sullenberger pulled off in the Hudson, okay, it's not necessarily a miracle. It's just really well done work. Yeah.
Position and planning ahead.
All that stuff.
So we did, as Mike said, we did a lot of that in our flying so far.